And you can see it. This is, it looks like more than a dot, but it is in fact less than a pixel, a single picture element in size. In this color picture you can see that it is slightly blue, and this is where we live, on a blue dot. Astronomy has always been said to be a humbling experience, and I think these pictures underscore that point. And the next slide. Oh, no, it was lightning fast. Can we go back to that? That's it. So here are the 6 of the 9 planets imaged in this portrait. The 3 smallest planets, Mercury, Mars, and Pluto, we were unable to photograph. The appearance of the Earth in this pseudo sunbeam is just an accident. It was no special significance is to be attributed to a beam of light lighting it up. All, of course, are in reflected sunlight. Well, on that blue dot, that's where everyone you know and everyone you ever heard of and every human being who ever lived out their lives. It's a very small stage in a great cosmic arena. And again, just speaking for myself, I think this perspective underscores our responsibility to preserve and cherish that blue dot, the only home we have.
You know, we humans come and go and briefly set foot on the stage and then exit, and but that's just very small potatoes compared to what the Earth is involved with and knows about. Every newspaper in America, with very few exceptions, has a daily astrology column. Astrology is bunk. Astrology is fraud. How many of them have even a weekly science column? Why that disproportion? How much real science is there on?
Well, they say they're giving them, that's what the networks all say. We're just giving the American people what they want.
And that, you know,
and we're dragging ourselves down and down and down over the last 40 years. I know, I mean, I've seen it.
The great thing that is happening in our time is that we are able, through a method which can actually make some progress towards the real universe out there, to find out something about origins, and this is the scientific method applied to the science of cosmology. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I thought it was more important to address the issue of feeling unhappy because it wasn't immediately understandable.
Well, yes, I find that extremely soothing, actually, because it is a kind of sort of formidable task of grasping this. It makes me want to retreat into trivial questions like, is this idea of predicting backwards going to put astrologers out of business?
Nothing will put astrologers out of business.
Well, alas.
The space program languished in the last 10 or 15 years, as we have let all sorts of social programs languish, as we have permitted the amount of poverty in children to increase. Before the end of this century, more than half the kids in America may be below the poverty line. What kind of a future do we build for the country if we raise all these kids as disadvantaged, as unable to cope with the society, as resentful for the injustice served up to them? This is stupid.
And then what happened with the resources is they went into increasing budgets for arms. Isn't that where the money went?
That and making rich people richer. Those are the two places.
Well, the thing about rich people, and being one, I guess, is the money all gets reinvested. If you've got money, you put it in the bank lends it out to people to buy homes or cars or whatever.
Not poor people. But not poor people.
Well, that's a good point.
It tends to stay up at that highly stratified, very...
More people get employed with capital formation and so forth. Are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
well,
but I believe that the government has a responsibility to care for the people. I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant, people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace.
I think the essence of the scientific method is the willingness to admit you're wrong, the willingness to abandon ideas that don't work, and the essence of religion is not to change anything. The supposed truths are handed down by some revered figure, and then no one is supposed to make any progress beyond that because all the truth is thought to be in hand.
I'm really talking about setting an agenda for the future.
My sense is that the scientific way of thinking, questioning, some delicate mix of creative encouragement of new ideas and the most rigorous and skeptical scrutiny of new and old ideas, I think that is the path to the future, not just for science, but for all human institutions. We have to be willing to challenge because we are in desperate need of change.
Do you think that there's life anywhere else in the universe?
Well, think is a strong word. If you look at how many other worlds there are, how many stars in the Milky Way galaxy, how likely it is that most of them most of them have planets, how many other galaxies there are, it seems the height of human arrogance to imagine that this planet is the only inhabited world. But at the same time, we don't know of life elsewhere yet. We're just at the very earliest stages of exploration, and we've not found life anywhere else. We've sent spacecraft, as I said before, to a wonderful, exquisite array of other worlds. We've learned an enormous amount from them. We find on some of them the chemicals necessary for the origin of life, the stirrings, the intimations of life, but no sign of life. We've also used big radio telescopes to see if anybody is sending us a radio message, and both of those efforts have not yet succeeded, so we haven't found life elsewhere. I would think a universe in which we are the only living things is much more incredible than a universe just burgeoning, overflowing with life. But we can't be sure. It's an experimental question. It has to be addressed experimentally. And that's one of the reasons that I'm such an advocate for sending spacecraft to other worlds and for using large radio telescopes to listen for signals. The solar system was a lot more traffic in it than there is now. And a lot of that debris we know from the exploration of Halley's Comet, for example. Comets are very rich in organic matter. So the stuff of life was falling on the Earth. Now, is that the hand of God or not? Well, if you believe in God, God established the physical laws of the universe. And chemistry is a consequence of physics, so all those molecules that led to life were made by God. It's possible to believe that. I'm not opposed to that idea, but I just say there is no evidence for it. And where there's no evidence, I say keep an open mind. Don't commit yourself in the absence of compelling evidence.
Yeah.
Global warming, the greenhouse effect. You put gases like carbon dioxide or CFCs, other greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere over this country. They don't stay over that country. Those molecules don't have passports. They don't know about national sovereignty. That's something they never heard of. The atmospheric circulation spreads those gases all over the planet. And so what one country does affects all the other countries. The solution to these kinds of problems has to be that everybody on Earth works together. The industrialized nations have the biggest responsibility because they're the biggest polluters. The United States puts more CO2 in the atmosphere than any other nation. But Western Europe and the Soviet Union and Japan and even the developing countries all make significant contributions. So there has to be a new way of looking at the future, and that is that we're all humans, members of the same species, on one fragile little planet. We're all in this together, and we have to work together. That's kind of the silver lining of these crises. They are forcing us to become a planetary species.
Imagine a room awash in gasoline, and there are two implacable enemies in that room. One of them has 9,000 matches. The other has 7,000 matches. Each of them is concerned about who's ahead, who's stronger. Well, that's the kind of situation we are actually in. The amount of weapons that are available to the United States and the Soviet Union are so bloated, so grossly in excess of what's needed to dissuade the other, that if it weren't so tragic, it would be laughable. What is necessary is to reduce the matches and to clean up the gasoline.
The viewers of this program do to make a difference in correcting these problems?
They can make sure that candidates who don't understand and aren't deeply committed to ending and reversing the nuclear arms race, to stopping greenhouse warming, and to stopping the depletion of the ozonosphere, that those guys aren't, men and women, are not elected. It's not enough to have a candidate say, I'm an environmentalist. In what way are you an environmentalist, Mr. or Ms. candidate? Take a look at the most recent election. There we had a candidate who said that he was an environmentalist. He, in contrast to the previous 8 years, where we had an uncompromising anti-environmentalist in the White House, okay, now there's a president, Mr. Bush, who at least acknowledges that there's a problem. We didn't even know that from listening to Mr. Reagan. But if you look at Mr. Bush's budget, we see not a hint of any real commitment to the environment. So I say, in a democracy, that's the most important thing a person can do. There are a lot of other things a person can do. You can plant trees. Every individual can plant trees. That's something that's very constructive. You can boycott industries which are irresponsible on global warming and on chlorofluorocarbons. There are many things people can do, but they have to understand the issue before they can do those things.
Well,
I think that's very important, the idea that we have information stored outside of our bodies. For most of the history of life on this planet, the organisms had almost all the information they had to deal with in their genes, hereditary information, instinct. Then about maybe 100 million years ago, a little longer ago than that, there came to be a reptile that for the first time in the history of life had more information in its brains than in its genes. And that was a major step symbolically in the evolution of life on this planet. Well, now we have an organism, us, which can store more information outside the body altogether than inside the body, and that's in books and computers and television video cassettes. And that extraordinarily expands our ability to understand what's happening and to manipulate, control our environment if we do it wisely for human benefit. The whole idea of what happens when you read a book I find absolutely stunning. Here's some product of a tree with little black squiggles on it. Right. You open it up, and inside your head is the voice of 1,000 years. And yet there he is talking directly to you. What a magical thing that is.
The story of Noah's Ark is, of course, a story. The books of the various great religions, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, and many others, are filled with stories. That doesn't mean we are to interpret them literally. And there are all sorts of problems with the Noah's Ark story, one of which is kangaroos. How did the kangaroos get to Australia if you literally believed the story of Noah's Ark? So I'm sure you meant that in a light tone, and my response is likewise. How to keep kids in school? Well, kids, I believe, are fundamentally very smart. And if they see school being taught by people who themselves are not interested in it, people who cannot do very well at teaching, if what they're being taught has no practical application, then why should they do it? So, for example, there's an awful lot of kids graduating high school who go into entry-level jobs in the service economy, waiting on tables, slinging hash, and so on. Now, do they get more money if they were good in second-year algebra? The answer is no. And they understand that. If there were more jobs that required this kind of education, there would be more kids who would go into that kind of education with some enthusiasm. If there were a connection between how well you did in school and how fast your salary increased later, as there is in many countries, kids would be much more interested.
It's an interesting question. Which organism would replace us if we wiped ourselves selectively out? An old professor of mine, H.J. Muller, geneticist, said he thought it was between the raccoons and the bears. And they're both very clever and do many different things. But my feeling is that the great apes, chimps, gorillas are so close to us already that they have a big head start if that were to happen. I hope it won't happen. And the way you guarantee that it doesn't happen is by using the kind of intelligence that nature has already given us.
Well, it's always used as an argument to make no changes whatever. Any change will lose jobs. So, for example, the A-12, the Navy fighter that was just canceled because it was absurdly over its cost estimates. There will be thousands of aerospace workers who will lose their jobs. Is that a good reason to pour additional billions of dollars into this rat hole? No, it's not. And if we were really concerned about losing jobs, we would have a federal job retraining program. We would have much better education at all levels in science and technology so people could move from one job to another. But we're not interested in that. The losing job argument is just trotted out for political convenience so that we don't have to make a change. No question, there are massive changes needed. Other countries seem perfectly able to make those changes, but we are not.
Well, there's two ways. One is its enormous gravity. A black hole is a place where the gravity is so intense that even light can't get out, so it's completely dark. But if it's revolving around some other object that is shining, then by the gravitational tugs that the black hole makes on this other star, you can detect its presence. And another thing that happens is that black holes tend to have disks of matter surrounding them in which the friction generates X-rays. And one of the candidate black holes, something called Cygnus X1, both does this gravitational pull and is a source of X-rays, and very likely is an example of the legendary black hole.
Yeah, then there was the theory that once you enter a black hole, you could go into another universe or into another time frame. I suppose that's science fiction so far?
Well, there are some people who seriously think that if you were to slip down into a black hole and could survive the trip, which is highly unlikely, that you would emerge somewhere else in space and when else in time.
It is important for us, humans, to be out there. And the reasons are, I can quickly say what they are. First is, we are an exploratory species. The last 10,000 years, we've been sitting around in civilization. Before that, for the last few 100,000 years, we were wanderers, explorers, nomads, and that is in our blood. And spaceflight is an opportunity, the only one open to us, to continue that long human tradition. Secondly, that technology I was talking about can pose a danger to ourselves. We inhabit a very thin protective atmosphere. Our technology can destroy that environment that protects us. I don't for a moment say that the Earth is a disposable planet. We have to make the most heroic efforts to preserve it and us. But I still think it would be a good insurance policy, hedging our bets, or as Republicans like to say, diversifying our portfolios, for there to be humans on other worlds as well as here. And finally, there's a specific identifiable hazard that, again, not in 10 years, but in hundreds or thousands starts to become worrisome. And that is that the Earth will be hit by a large asteroid or comet, and if we're ever going to deal with that, we have to be in space. Put all that together, and I see on a time scale of decades to centuries, we really have to have a significant presence in space.
Well, it's certainly what I'm talking about in the demon-haunted world. My feeling, Charlie, is that it's not that pseudoscience and superstition and New Age so-called beliefs and fundamentalist zealotry are something new. They've been with us for as long as we've been human. But we live in an age based on science and technology with formidable technological powers.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
That's right. And if we don't understand it, by we I mean the general public, if it's something that, oh, I'm not good at that, I don't know anything about it, then who is making all the decisions about science and technology that are going to determine what kind of future our children live in?
just some members of Congress, but there's no more than a handful of members of Congress with any background in science at all. And the Republican Congress has just abolished its own Office of Technology Assessment, the organization that gave them bipartisan, competent advice on science and technology. They say, we don't want to know. Don't tell us about science and technology.
Surprising, because Gingrich is genuinely interested, I think, in these kinds of things as a, out of his own intellectual curiosity. Does the president still have a science advisor?
He does. John Gibbon, and the vice president is scientifically literate. Yes,
scientifically, a science maven. I mean, you blast them all. Creationist, Christian scientists who you say would rather allow their children to suffer than give them insulin or antibiotics. Astrologers come in for particular scorn on your part.
Well, I would say scorn, just derision.
Derision. A more generous version of scorn. But what's the danger of all this? I mean, this is not the thing that...
There's two kinds of dangers. One is what I just talked about, that we've arranged a society based on science and technology, in which nobody understands anything about science and technology, and this combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson laid great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government runs us.
But the thing that I find most striking is the enormous, remarkable capability of virtually every small child for learning. They start out eager, intellectually wide-eyed, asking extremely clever questions about the world, and then something happens, by and large, to discourage them. And I think it's a tremendous waste of natural resources. They're encouraged.
Here's this spacecraft that has flown by the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune systems, is on its way, astonishingly, to the stars, a triumph of human engineering. We turn the cameras back and take a photograph of the planet from where it came. And we can barely see it. Here it is, a fragile, delicate, pale blue dot, and that's where we live. That's where every human has ever lived, and you can see the vulnerability at a glance. And that gives a humbling and, I think, character-building sense of where we are.
Humbling because it says that we're only one small portion of something that is enormously large?
Absolutely. And let me say a word about what that is. This dot is one of 9 planets that goes around a humdrum star that lives at the outskirts of a perfectly ordinary galaxy, which is composed of 400 billion other stars in a universe of maybe 100 billion galaxies. And recent thoughts suggest this universe one of a very large number, perhaps an infinite number of other closed-off universes. In that context, what is the chance that we are the center or the point of the universe?
And you can see it. This is, it looks like more than a dot, but it is in fact less than a pixel, a single picture element in size. In this color picture you can see that it is slightly blue, and this is where we live, on a blue dot. Astronomy has always been said to be a humbling experience. And I think these pictures underscore that point. And the next slide. Oh, no, it was lightning fast. Can we go back to that? That's it. So here are the 6 of the 9 planets imaged in this portrait. The 3 smallest planets, Mercury, Mars, and Pluto, we were unable to photograph. The appearance of the Earth in this pseudo sunbeam is just an accident. It was no special significance is to be attributed to a beam of light lighting it up. All, of course, are in reflected sunlight. Well, on that blue dot, that's where everyone you know and everyone you ever heard of and every human being who ever lived out their lives. It's a very small stage in a great cosmic arena. And again, just speaking for myself, I think this perspective underscores our responsibility to preserve and cherish that blue dot, the only home we have.
You know, we humans come and go and briefly set foot on the stage and then exit, and but that's just very small potatoes compared to what the Earth is involved with and knows about. Every newspaper in America, with very few exceptions, has a daily astrology column. Astrology is bunk. Astrology is fraud. How many of them have even a weekly science column? Why that disproportion?
It is a kind of sort of formidable task of grasping this that makes me want to retreat into trivial questions like, is this idea of predicting backwards going to put astrologers out of business?
Nothing will put astrologers out of business.
Well, alas.
The space program languish in the last 10 or 15 years, as we have let all sorts of social programs languish, as we have permitted the amount of poverty in children to increase. Before the end of this century, more than half the kids in America may be below the poverty line. What kind of a future do we build for the country if we raise all these kids as disadvantaged, as unable to cope with the society, as resentful? How much real science is there on?
Well, they say they're giving them, that's what the networks all say. We're just giving the American people what they want.
And that, you know,
and we're dragging ourselves down and down and down over the last 40 years. I know, I mean, I've seen it.
The great thing that is happening in our time is that we are able, through a method which can actually make some progress towards the real universe out there, to find out something about origins, and this is the scientific method applied to the science of cosmology. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I thought it was more important to address the issue of feeling unhappy because it wasn't immediately understandable.
Well, yes, I find that extremely soothing, actually, because